Alrighty, so I started training in martial arts when I was 12, back in 1979, in a small, but actually for our town, a good-sized dojo. And the instructor's name was Ray Murphy. I did that for a while, and jumping ahead real quick, I was at a dojo last night talking to people, and actually found somebody else that trained with Ray Murphy in 1979 too, and we got to talking. We were in the same class. I don't remember her at all, but we were in the same class together back in 1979, and she still has contact with Ray, and as a matter of fact, invited me to come and train with him again. So I'm going to go visit my very first instructor sometime this week. So anyway, going back in history again. So 1979 was when I first started martial arts. I did that for a while, and I realized that was not what I was looking for. I wanted something else, and at the time, I didn't know what I was looking for. Later in life, I would realize what it was and end up finding it. But in 1979, I just knew that your normal, everyday, dojo-style, karate-type martial art was not what I was looking for. But at the time, that was really all that was out there. At least in my... Everything I'm talking about is predicated off of my experiences, so... just from my experience. So there was nothing else out there for me. Eventually, I found a dojo called Way of the Warrior, and this was in the mid-80s, and my brother was doing Shorin-ryu, Matsumura style Shorin-ryu. Make that clear, there's several different forms of Shorin-ryu, but he was doing Matsumura style Shorin-ryu, and he asked me to show up to the classes. I told him I would go, but I told him I wasn't interested in your dojo style karate martial arts, but I would go because there was nothing else around. I showed up. They convinced me to start training Shorin-ryu because the owner of the dojo was also teaching Filipino sword and stick fighting called Kali. And, hold on, excuse me, sorry. Hopefully that'll help. So he was teaching a style called Kali, and I saw him do it, and I was like, wow, I was excited. So I started training with him, and for the first time in my life, I had found something that I really liked, I felt was realistic, and it was what I call truth in martial arts. It was the very first truth I had ever found, and I was ecstatic about it. And I trained with him in Kali for many years. And to be totally honest, a few years back we got together and did some stuff too, but I'll talk about that later. But so that was my very first realistic truth in martial arts, was Filipino Kali. So I did that for many, many years. Then in 1992, while still training in Kali and everything, I joined the Army. And I stayed in the Army for the 3.5 years that I volunteered for. And in 1995, I was released from the military, honorably discharged. I was with the 1st of the 39th Field Artillery Airborne. I jumped out of planes with 155 millimeter howitzers. My 18th jump, which was 7 or 8 months before I was getting ready to get out of the Army. On my 18th jump, I broke my leg. Well, actually it was my ankle. I broke my ankle. I'll be more specific. I broke my ankle. And I was jacked up. So after that, I had one more jump that I was required to do while I was still in the unit before I left. And I could not do it. I told him, I said, you know, my leg isn't any better. I said, I cannot, I'm getting out in like 7 months. I said, I'm jacked up as it is. I said, I'm not making it any worse. I said, can't you just let me slide this one time? They said no. So they shipped me off to what we call a leg unit, which is a non-airborne unit. So they shipped me off to the 3rd of the 8th. And I spent my last 7 months down there in service battery, and which was fine, but my heart is always with the 1st of 39th. When people ask me what unit I was with, I always say the 1st of the 39th. And so anyway, so I got out of the military. I came back to my podunk little town, and one of the very first things, well, I had a job waiting on me. So I had a job immediately. And the first thing that I did when I got back to town was I opened up my dojo. It was 1995, and at the time I didn't know the way the rules and the laws were, and I thought I had to have a business license to open up a dojo, and I found out later that you don't. At least in the state of Indiana, you do not have to have a business license unless you're selling a material item. What I was basically selling was intellectual, and therefore I was not required to have a business license. But I did not know that at the time, and to be totally honest, getting that business license years later is going to save my rear. But anyway, 1995, I opened up the Zenshin Self-Defense Academy. And at the time, I was teaching predicated off of mainly my Filipino Kali and the little bit of other smatterings of stuff that I had. And I still hadn't had the 3 big ones that everything is predicated off of now. But at the time, it was what it was. So I ran that dojo forever and never really made a lot of money off of it. And in this town, you're not going to make money off of martial arts. Just isn't going to happen, plain and simple. But past all that, because that's a completely different video. I never ran my dojo or taught martial arts for the purpose of financial gain. Never my idea, never wanted it, never will. I do it because I love it. Plain and simple. So anyway, got the dojo going. 1995, got the dojo going. Not bad. I mean, what I was teaching wasn't horrible. Wasn't anything like it would become. So, shortly after I got out of the Army, the UFC had already started. The UFC had started in 1992 or 93, somewhere around there is when it first started. And I saw the very first UFC. I was sitting in the barracks with a couple of the guys, and I looked at them and I said, I'm going to do that. That's what I'm meant to do right there. And, yeah, I remember those days. So anyway, I got out, got the dojo going, wasn't doing horribly bad, wasn't making any money. I was always losing money. But, like I said, it's never a business. Never a business. Eventually, I got hooked up with a MMA group, mixed martial art group in town. And they were just starting out with MMA, just like everybody else. And I got involved with them, trained my ass off. Literally, trained my ass off. Started fighting in cages, became a professional mixed martial art cage fighter, and did that for many years, and I loved it. But the MMA, somewhere, and I honestly can't pinpoint when it was, but somewhere the strictly MMA, early days MMA, kind of started transforming into more of a structured jiu-jitsu, the Brazilian jiu-jitsu style that's known today. I started to evolve into adding that, and started working with Brazilian jiu-jitsuists while I was still doing MMA, and that became a thing. Now, this whole time, from 1979 until today, I have never cared about martial art belts, martial art ranking, certificates, none of that stuff. I personally do not care about it. It doesn't mean anything to me personally. And I've always felt that way. Now, recently, not that my personal opinion has changed, but my attitude has changed a little bit, and I'll explain why. But first, let's jump back to the mid to late 90s. Early 2000s, mid 2000s. We'll get into that. So, at this point, in 2005, I make my way through the local regional MMA groups and fights to position myself to fight for a title. So I was offered to fight for Cage Rage, their middleweight title. Yes, at the time I was a middleweight. I weighed 175 pounds when I was fighting. Now, when I began fighting, I weighed 175 pounds. By the time I ended my career, I was at 185, which I was still very, very small. I did have a little bit of a pooch, little bit of a belly, but not huge. So anyway, I fought for the title. I was lucky enough to win that title, and I became Cage Rage middleweight champion. Shortly after that, and at this time I'm in my mid to late 30s. I'm into my mid to late 30s at this point. For those of you who have ever done any actual physical cage fighting or even training, people that age generally, are going downhill, not up. So eventually, it just became more than my body could really take at the time. So I retired. I retired from fighting. I retired from cage fighting. And I became more of an instructor, a teacher. And by that time, I was pretty decent with it, I think. Still didn't care about belts, didn't care about ranks, didn't care about any of that. Alright, so then I retired, and that was pretty much my fighting career, but I was still into the teaching and everything. Now we go to 2000, we'll jump back a tad bit, 2004, 2005, 2004, I think it was 2004, I was at a dojo doing my MMA BJJ stuff when somebody mentioned that they were going to have an Aikido seminar at the dojo. It was like a week or so down the road. And my eyes went, woo! You know, Aikido was something I was interested in my whole life. I don't know why, honestly. I had never trained it. I had seen people do it, but I had never trained it. But it was something I was interested in. So I lit up. Immediately went in, paid my fee to get to this seminar, and boom, I was in. I did the seminar. I loved it. After class, I talked to the instructor to see if he was going to start classes. There wasn't any real interest in starting an entire class, but he was willing to work with me. Boom! I started doing Aikido. Kijitsukai Aikido. So anyway, 2004, somewhere around there, is when I started doing Aikido. Whoop. I hope that didn't, yeah. There we go. In 2004, I started doing Aikido. In 2006, well, tad bit back, 2005, late 2005 to early 2006, my Aikido instructor came up to me and said, I need somebody to take over for me because I want to retire. I want you to test for your black belt so that you can start teaching classes. And I said, well, I don't care about belts. You know that, because he knew my attitude. And he said, I understand that, but people want to see that black belt. I don't know, it makes people feel better, it makes people think you know something, I don't know. But anyway, he asked me to test for my black belt. I said, nah, no thank you. And we went on for a few more months, and he came back to me, and he gave me a sob story, and told me that he wanted me to do it because he wanted me to take over. So I said, finally I said, okay, I'll do it. So myself and one other guy tested on the 6th of August 2006. We both tested for our black belts in Kijitsukai Aikido, and from that point on, I was considered an official black belt in Aikido. So another video, a different video entirely. Let's just say that the other guy that I trained with and tested with on that day, he and I did not really get along too well. It wasn't bad, it's just that we didn't get along well. Anyway, he was more financially stable than I was, and still am. So he kind of took over with that, and he kind of inserted himself to the point where him and the instructor kind of got more buddy-buddy than the instructor and I did. And it kind of went bad from there. But anyway, eventually, many years after 2006, let's see, I couldn't even tell you. It was several years later, I finally decided that it was time for me to leave that organization and branch out on my own. It was just better. So I finally, it was a Saturday class, maybe a Friday night class. One of the, I can't remember now. It's horrible. But anyway, I told him I'm done. You know, I'm leaving. So I took off. I got my own building. I started teaching. I had students coming, going, this, that, and the other. It wasn't really fantastic. I really couldn't keep the dojo going. Just didn't have the finances to keep it going. So what I did was that my mother ended up winning a lottery, like the Indiana State, scratch-off ticket lottery. She, woo, she won the lottery. So her and I do not get along. Right up front. My mom and I are not close at all. Anyway, she wins the lottery. She tells me, if there's anything you need, let me know. So to be an ass, and I'll be honest, I was just being an ass because I knew what the answer was. I went over to her one day and asked her for $3,000. And of course she said no. Anyway, long story short, I did end up getting that $3,000. And I built a building. It was a 16 by 20 shed is what it was. It cost me $3,000 to build. It was a 16 by 20 shed. I used my mentality, and I built a wood-burning stove out of an old water heater, and I ran electricity myself, and I built myself a dojo. And I turned that 16 by 20 shed into a dojo. And I ran classes out of there for years. I ran classes out of that dojo. And then, like I said, 2 years ago, I decided I was going to stop. I was just done. And I did. And we were moving. We weren't moving a distance. We were actually just moving across the street, to be totally honest. But I couldn't move that shed. The space that I had across the street was not big enough for the shed. Now, I was told by the property owners, or the manager of the property, that I could move the shed to an empty lot that was next door to me, but if they ever needed it, I had to immediately move the shed, which I couldn't do. Not immediately. So I was a little nervous about it. I had decided I was going to stop doing martial arts. So I said, okay, I appreciate it, but I don't think I'm going to do that. And my cousin, who helped, I shouldn't say helped me build, who actually built the shed, was needing it for storage for his business. So I said, okay, dude, and he gave me $300 and took off with the shed. So I no longer have that 16 by 20 shed to train in. So now it is February 10th of 2017, And I might add, happy birthday, Tracy. She would have been 48 today. So anyway, and also, my wife and I celebrate, well, our legal marriage date is today. We actually got married in September, and there was some problems with some paperwork and stuff. So we did our ceremony and did the whole hoopla in September. And what happened was the paperwork didn't work out right, so we had to redo the paperwork. Well, September went, and October, November, December, January, and then that next February, we actually got all the paperwork straightened out. We went up to the courthouse and filed the paperwork, and we did it on February 10th so that I would not be so emotional, so I'd have something happy to do on February 10th. So anyway, February 10th, I try to not think about it. To be totally honest, I try not to think about it. But anyway, get all past all that. So anyway, that's pretty much a skim over of my entire martial art career. Not a total thing, but basically I started in 79 and I'm still here. So anyway, all that just to say I'm getting the dojo I'm getting the band back together. I'm going to start the dojo back up somehow. I'm going to start teaching. Right now, I would prefer to stick mainly to the Aikido, because I can do the other stuff, but I wouldn't mind maybe dabbling and training in my other stuff, but as far as teaching goes, I'm most comfortable with the Aikido.